everybody pulled forward where they need to be after that? Yep. Can everybody hear? Malt box good? Everybody good? All right. Thank you for staying. I know that was a crowded room and a great environment. A lot of excitement today. We have Mr. Charlie Bolden down, our administrator. He's going to give a few words, and then we're going to go into a Q&A. So I welcome up the administrator, Charlie Bolden. Thank you.
And I know you all were here when we made the award, but just for the benefit of the hopefully the listening audience, let me just cover a few statements that I wanted to make. And it's as I say a lot of times when I come, it's always good to be back in the Rocket City. I have not been here in probably a month or two, but and things are happening so fast that every time I come back, then there's been some change. From the Space Launch System, SLS, to the International Space Station, to all the other important work that goes on here, day in and day out, to support businesses large, medium, and small, there's one very large conclusion that we can all come to, and I think I've said this before, and that's the journey to Mars runs through Marshall. You know, I think the last time I was here, there was a lot of angst about what was happening, and I had to reemphasize it for the workforce here, that we cannot think of a path to Mars that doesn't come through here. This is the propulsion center for the space agency of the United States, and so I cannot conceive of a time that we would not be taking a journey anywhere off the planet where we didn't come through here. So that's really important. They say that small business is the backbone of America, and in many ways it's the backbone of NASA's journey to Mars. Take, for example, the SLS. Approximately 40% of the raw materials and components used by the prime contractors to build the SLS rocket are being produced by small businesses across the U.S. And I think that's pretty impressive. I don't know about you, 40%. All told, more than 800 small businesses in 43 states around the country are providing components to develop the Space Launch System. Just think about that for a minute. 800 small businesses across the nation are making it possible for us to launch the SLS with Orion on it to Mars. Meanwhile, Americans are working at more than 1,000 companies, many of them small businesses, across nearly every state on NASA's commercial space initiatives. So small business not only matters to our economy and our families, when it comes to the journey to Mars, it's vitally important to our future. Meanwhile, when it comes to empowering American small businesses, the team here at Marshall has put together somewhat of a dynasty, and all you need to do is, we were joking earlier, since I'm in the state of Alabama, you all can relate much better than I can, actually. It looks like we're in the Alabama trophy room or something with all this crystal. You see, over the past 8 years, NASA has awarded the Small Business Administrator's Cup to this center that manages the most effective small business program, to the center that has managed the most effective small business program. The award honors innovative practices that promote small business participation in a variety of NASA initiatives. Furthermore, it recognizes significant contributions to our agency's small business programs. For 5 of the past 8 years, this award has been claimed by Marshall. 5 of the past 8 years. That means you are the only one championship ring away from matching Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls with a three-peat. Glendale, and so since we broke the precedent, the unwritten rule that a center couldn't win 2 years in a row, then I don't know that we have a rule that says you can't win 3 years in a row. So we don't have to worry about that. Glenn Delgado, who is sitting here and who heads our Office of Small Business Programs, came from Washington with me this morning to present the award to Todd, the Center Director, and to David Brock and his dedicated team of employees here at Marshall that made this happen. David's leadership in supporting small business is second to none. You often hear me refer to him, and I said it just a little while ago, as a national treasure, and that's because he is. Marshall leadership at the top has remained noteworthy during my tenure as the NASA administrator, starting with Robert Lightfoot, going to Patrick Sherman, and now to Todd May. But there has been one constant throughout all of these changes in leadership, and that's been David Brock. In fiscal year 2015, Marshall procurement dollars amounted to approximately $1.9 billion. Of this amount, small businesses received $270 million in direct dollars and another $285 million through the prime contractor subcontracting programs. This included work that supported missions to other planets, major human spaceflight programs, and development of new technologies that led to new discoveries. In short, we are creating jobs and fueling economic growth here on Earth at the very same time we move closer to our goal of sending American astronauts first to an asteroid and then on to Mars. And that's something for which we can all be very, very proud. Thank you all for joining us today, and congratulations to the women and men of the Marshall Space Flight Center, Huntsville, and the broader North Alabama community. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over, and I think we'll get to questions.
Thank you, Administrator Bolden. Now we'll take questions from the reporters in the room. Please state your name and media affiliation, and we'll go around the room. Anybody got a question? Lee, right here.
Hey, Shawnee. AL.com, Hustle Times.
Great.
Thanks for meeting with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
BuzzFeed, just a few weeks ago, had another big feature on the rockets that they're talking about SLS. What do you think when you hear that terminology? I don't know if you've read the piece.
I don't. I look at that.
Why is that wrong?
It's absolutely wrong because I don't consider Mars to be nowhere. Mars is the most ambitious destination that humanity has ever accepted, and because President Obama has set that as the ultimate goal for NASA as early as 2010 when he went down to the Kennedy Spacer and delivered. You all have gotten accustomed to hearing me now say it was what I consider to be a major space policy address, not like John Kennedy at Rice or before Congress when he said we're going to the moon, but still not in no small way should be considered trivial. He set two goals for us. One was to put humans on asteroids by 2025. We're not doing it the way that people classically think of going to the main asteroid belt. That's beyond Mars, so that's for another time. But we still believe that with the asteroid redirect mission, where we're intending to redirect a large boulder from an asteroid to stable orbit around the moon, and then let our astronauts travel there on SLS and Orion, that we're going to fulfill the intent of that challenge. The second challenge was to put humans on Mars or in the Martian environment with the intent of landing in the 2030s. And we're well on the way to doing that. If you look at the plan that we have in place right now, and people say, yeah, but you don't have a concrete plan. Yes, we do. When you think about the way that systems are developed, you set a goal, and then you walk back from that goal saying, what things do I need to do in order to make that goal? And so the president told us Mars in 2030, and we believe that by flying SLS and Orion integrated in 2018, and then coming back and in 2023, or maybe as early as 2021, depending on how our funding goes, with the first crewed flight, and then spending about a 10-year period of time in what we call the proving ground of the vicinity of the moon, we're going to reach Mars in 2030. So anybody who doesn't feel that Mars is a good destination or wants to consider it nowhere, then I tell them, have at it. But anyone will tell you, if we're going to put humans on any other planet, it takes a lot of lift capability, and that's SLS. Yeah.
Follow up. From where you sit, do you think this plan is going to survive the election?
Yeah, I really do. And I get asked that. One of the things I try to tell our employees, Lee, is, you know what you do, and you know how to do it. We do it better than anybody else in the world. I challenge anyone who can put up a space organization anywhere that can match what we do. And that goes for the national security apparatus. And that may be a bold statement to make, but they focus on one thing, and that's national security. When you look at NASA and what the National Aeronautics and Space Administration does, you can look across this room. We're with you when you fly on airplanes. We're doing innovation and technology development that goes across the planet, to be quite honest. We just released some what do we call these things? No, not CubeSats, but patents for availability of anybody that wants to take them. And that's because NASA can do that because everything we do is in the public domain. We don't do anything in-house that's classified. Now, sometimes because we're supporting other agencies, that work is, but that's theirs. NASA doesn't do anything that's not in the public domain, and we do that better than any other organization on the face of the planet today. So Todd and I were talking about it. I tell people, just imagine you're the next president, and you sit down in the Oval Office on day one. You know, you finally get into the Oval Office after that long inauguration parade, because you can't just go up to the quarters and lay down and say, boy, what a day. You're going to go sit at the desk. And if you allow yourself to think, that person, him or her, to think, okay, what's going to happen? Everybody talks about 100 days. What's going to happen in my first term? If I don't do anything, if I do absolutely nothing, we are going to launch SLS and Orion. We are actually going to have 2 commercial providers carry American astronauts from the Kennedy Space Center and the Cape Canaveral complex to the International Space Station, unheralded, never been done before. Juno will have already entered Martian orbit, entered Jupiter orbit. We are going to land the Mars 2020 rover on the surface of Mars, that for the first time in human history, or history that anybody knows, we're going to intake some carbon dioxide from the atmosphere of Mars, and we're going to output oxygen. And that means we are going to be able to produce on the surface of another planet an element that can be used to propel vehicles, that can be used to keep humans alive. That is unprecedented. And those are just a few things that the president can sit, rock back, fold his or her arms, and say, man, I'm doing this stuff. And any president that doesn't take credit for it, you know, on day one, because it's going to be his or hers. So I think that when people look at the totality of what we've done over these years, and that doesn't even mention X-planes. In the field of aeronautics, again, because we're hoping that when the Congress, the House and Senate come together in conference, we're going to get a pretty substantial increase in our aeronautics budget, and that's going to allow us to begin to build X-planes again, something that the old NACA used to do, and we kind of faded away from it when we started focusing really on just human spaceflight. But we're going to build X-planes. We're going to build demonstrators that are going to keep the United States ahead of every other nation in aeronautics. So I feel really good about it.
Right here with Josh.
Yeah.
Josh Barrett,
Yeah, Josh.
SpaceAlabama.com. Lockheed Martin just announced plans for their Mars base camp.
Yeah.
They want to start building it in 2021 using the SLS. Is that possible right now with all of the...
Well, nobody in Lockheed Martin has, and this is not a snitty answer. This is a NASA vehicle, belongs to me right now, and nobody there has talked to me about borrowing it. You know, in 2021, I just told you what we plan to do. In 2018, we're going to fly SLS and Orion, and that's going to be an uncrewed mission, and it's going to go out around the moon, much in the form of what we did in the early Apollo program. And then in 2023 or 2021, if everything works well, we're going to have a NASA crew that's going to fly into space around the moon, and that will be the beginning of what we call the proving ground period of time, and that's really important. There are a lot of people who believe that they can do things in certain periods of time. We have a plan, and that plan is backed up by funding from the Congress, and it's backed up by agreement between the Congress and the administration that Mars is our goal, is our ultimate goal. We need our commercial partners to help us do that. Some of you know that we signed an agreement recently with SpaceX to help them in their attempt to get an uncrewed vehicle to Mars. You know, can they do it? I don't know. But am I hoping they can? I sure do, because at some point, for us to land a human on Mars, we're going to have to understand things like supersonic retropropulsion. Somebody's going to have to test that. If we can get a commercial partner to invest their money and do the test, and we get the data, I'm all in. You remember how we flew Orion the first time? Because we had not bought the vehicle yet from Lockheed Martin. They wanted to test it. We agreed, so we launched. They contracted with themselves and launched Orion on a Delta Heavy, and we got all that data. So that's a series of tests that NASA did not have to do. We were a partner with Lockheed Martin doing that test, but I'm very satisfied with the work that the team is doing, contractor and NASA, and I can't speak to a contractor's plans for things that they're going to do down the road.
Since you brought up Congress, I wanted to follow up. They just finished up marking out the budget.
Yeah.
A lot of increases for SLS. Prompted some criticism that it's taking money away from technology that you need to get to Mars.
Yeah.
Is that a fair criticism?
Well, I think I mentioned to you that when we go into conference, you should go back remember, there are two houses of Congress. There's the Senate and there's the House. Now, I'm getting in trouble here because I am not a legislative expert, but I've learned a lot in my 7 years. And so both of them mark up. And as we always see, the Senate has things they like, the House has things they like, and sometimes they play games with each other. And that's okay as long as in the end, we get a stable program. And that's what we've gotten from Congress pretty much routinely. And what I think you're going to see when they go into conferences where the House put in significant increases for space technology and aeronautics and planetary science, and the Senate put in significant increases for SLS and Orion, when they come together in Congress, it all evens out, and we end up with significant increases across the board, because the House number, if I remember correctly, was 19.5, and the Senate number was 19.3. So even if they meet each other halfway and we get 19.4, that's an increase in what we have for 2016. So I'm the eternal optimist. Okay.
All right, let's go to Liz right here.
You are the eternal optimist, probably Bolden. But my question is, thinking back several years ago, when we were in a same political climate with a new president,
Yeah.
tell us what's different now.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
how, I guess, what's in place to protect the SLS program from cancellation?
Yeah.
Huntsville has certainly seen
Yeah.
the cancellation of Constellation, and, you know, the test flight actually flew.
Yeah.
SLS has not flown. So
Yeah.
what's the proviso?
Well, let me, at the risk of getting in trouble here, Liz, let me try to take you back there. The big difference is, at the time that I came into my office, Constellation had not flown. And in fact, Constellation was still, some of it was under construction. Not the heavy lift launch vehicle. We were beginning to build the components for Ares 1. But if you remember, and I do because I was on the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, we were running into significant problems, design problems with Ares 1 in the vehicle, Orion, for the crew, and Ares 1, and a lot of vibration we were having. And from a technical perspective, you have a building here at Marshall, by the way, a test structure where it has a huge attenuator on it. Ask Todd to take you out there sometime, and you will see the lengths to which we were going to try to solve this problem that we had with vibration in the Orion Ares 1 matchup. So we decided, I consulting with the president, decided that it was a bridge too far to hope that we could bring the Constellation program from where it was to an operational program. And so we said, okay, let's stop where we are. Let's cut our losses. Let's press with a couple of things. Let's phase out of the shuttle over a reasonable period of time, and let's put some investment into commercial space. In addition to cargo, let's get an American capability to launch crews commercially. And so that's what we undertook. And as I said when I was out at the National Space Symposium, who would have ever thought 5 years ago that we'd be standing here today, I'd be talking to you, and we would have SpaceX and Orbital ATK as the prime providers for transportation of cargo to the International Space Station. Who would have ever thought that? Who would have ever thought that we'd be a year and a half away from having SpaceX and Boeing actually launch two, count them, distinctly different crew vehicles from the Space Coast, first uncrewed, but then the second flight with American astronauts, eventually getting to the International Space Station. And we should have that operational in 2018, so that's less than 2 years away. Who would have ever dreamed that? I mean, it was folly 5 years ago to many people outside of NASA. But we, as I said earlier, we had faith in industry. We had faith in small business. We had faith in our partners who had helped us build every spacecraft up until now and continue to do it. And so we were confident we could do that. We had confidence that we could design and build a heavy lift launch vehicle. And you can talk to anybody you want, no matter who it is that's going to Mars, and ask them, what's it going to take to get humans on the planet? And they're going to say, it's going to take a lot of lift, and it's got to take a lot of stuff, and it's going to take something like SLS, or a lot of littler things than SLS. And that's how we got to this design. It's going to take us multiple launches of this vehicle to put humans on Mars. But we went for not the perfect vehicle, but the optimal vehicle, considering where our technology was today, but making it adaptable to emerging technologies. So, what we take to Mars with humans may not even have solid rocket boosters. That we haven't even gotten to the selection of the advanced booster yet. That could be a liquid booster, who knows? But we're taking it one step at a time. It's a step-by-step progression, and we'll get there. And that's not being the eternal optimist. That's just the fledgling wanted to be engineer in me that says you got to do all this stuff.
So it is a protected program.
I think it's a protected program. It is protected because the Congress, in our system of government, the president proposes and the Congress disposes. Congress roundly opposed termination of Constellation. But what President Obama allowed us to do was come back to the Congress and the nation and say, okay, we're not going to do Constellation, but we are still focused on deep space exploration. And we're going to go back. I always say we're going back to the future. STS, the Space Transportation System, that was presented to President Nixon back in the late 60s, actually, and probably talked a little bit to presidents before that. But the STS, the Space Transportation System, was designed to do three things: provide routine access to low Earth orbit, to get to an orbiting space station, one or more, that we could use to build rockets and build telescopes and do other stuff and do science that would enable us to use a subsequent transfer vehicle that would take us from Earth orbit to lunar orbit and eventually out to Mars. That was the Space Transportation System. And, when you're given a limited amount of money, you say, what do we need first? We need shuttle. So let's build a shuttle and let's make it good. And we flew it for 30 absolutely incredible years. So that's why I think it's a protected program, because we are way farther down the road today than we ever would have been with Constellation. If you go to Michoud, we're building barrel sections. We're assembling a vehicle. We have tested. We have flown Orion. It's not something that we're talking about pulling off the drawing board. It has been farther in space than any other vehicle intended to carry humans had been at the time it flew 2 years ago. That's just an accomplishment. I'm not talking about things I'm dreaming about. I'm talking about the accomplishment. So yeah, I think it's a protected program.
Go right here, Scott.
Scott Johnson, Space Flight Insider. Carly, you mentioned, answering Liz's question, you mentioned commercial crews possibly flying in 2017, 2018. Follow up on that. I think last year you stated that you hoped you never had to write another check to Ross Cosmos. There was a report a few days ago, I think by TASS, indicated that either you or your successor
Yeah.
get to write 6 more checks to Ross Cosmos for about 88 billion feet.
No.
If you
I can tell you that won't happen. The only thing that could happen that would require any future administrator to have to write many more checks to the Russians, and 6 is out of the question, would be for commercial crew to completely fail, which I don't see that happening with American industry. American industry would have to say, okay, it was a good try, we quit. That's what it would take. We quit. You have already seen SpaceX and Orbital ATK suffer a failure, each of them, with commercial cargo. A lesser group of people would have said, that's enough, we quit, this is hard. SpaceX got to work, and they have now reflown their vehicle a number of times, have also come back and landed on a barge and landed on land, demonstrating reusable technology. Orbital, ATK, did something else that we bragged about, and that was they showed that their obligation to NASA was to provide a service. They knew that they did not have a launch vehicle until they got a new engine and got their vehicle straight, but they went to another provider, to ULA, and used the Atlas V, and we have flown 2 highly successful missions on an upgraded Cygnus. It was by going to the Atlas V for 2 flights, they were able to upgrade the Cygnus and send more cargo mass to orbit than we had ever done before. And so they've demonstrated resilience. They've demonstrated the validity of our proposal that we have redundant, reliance on industry to provide a service, not a vehicle. So, you know, they went out and got a little bit different vehicle than we originally were flying.
Was there a new, I think this night before reported that there was a new Russian employee 6-seat contract signed in January?
You know, we may have signed another contract to take care of 2019 if we went into that. But the way that the commercial crew program works is that once we're flying on an American-built spacecraft, we will continue to use Soyuz, but the Russians will begin to fly on our spacecraft, and then we go into the same arrangement we have with all of our international partners, and there's no exchange of funds. So there's a word for it. It's not quid pro quo. It's don't even think about it. There's no exchange of funds. So I think that's probably the last contract that you're going to see anybody sign for a Soyuz vehicle for a crew, because when we fly on each other's vehicles, it'll just be, one for one. I do not, but we can try to find it for you. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. We're heating on.
Sure.
Christine, right here.
Can you just talk to me with Marshall receiving the small business award? Can you just talk to me about NASA's continued impact on local businesses and the workforce in the area?
I could, but I'm going to call on Todd. In fact, I'm going to call on Todd and David Brock, because this is their show, their trophy, and it would be, presumptuous of me to try to tell you about local business when I've got the two pros here who can talk about it. And I'm not begging out. I just want you to get the real.
So I'll say a few words here. You heard Charlie say it earlier that the small business is the backbone of American economy, but we're building the world's most powerful rocket here, and you realize, you heard some of the numbers, they're almost gaudy, of about $1.9 billion in terms of straight to subcontractors and through the primes. Almost $500 million a year is going to the small businesses, and those are the ones that are critically important. In a lot of cases, they have the secret sauce of what it takes to actually get this rocket built. And so it is critically important, and a lot of those companies are right here in the North Alabama region. So with that, I'll turn it over to David Rock and let him tell you a little more about it.
That's fine. And I would follow on what Todd has said. The small business community, many of the companies that we work with day in and day out, they reside right here in the Huntsville marketplace. In fact, if you look at our top 20 prime contractors, 9 of those are going to be small businesses, and all 9 of those small businesses, they have offices right here in Huntsville. And many of the contractor employees that are employed here at Marshall work on site, are near the center. Many of them work for small companies. So, yes, they have a major impact on our economy, not only from the standpoint of, at Marshall, but, from the Huntsville community abroad, and it's continuing to grow and expand.
All right. That concludes our press conference today. I want to thank you guys for coming out. It's always great to have Administrator Bolden and Glenn here today. It's just great. They always bring a lot of energy. If you didn't get your questions answered or you need something else, just feel free to call us back, and thank you for coming out today.